All right, this is the beginning of our third section, the Electional Astrology. And there will be tonight and two more, and if I get permissions and I find the time, there will be three more after tonight. And in review, the first thing we looked at is what is happening. We looked at the ephemeral passages of the stars, and we looked at cycles and the kinds of things that happen at various stages of cycles. And we looked at an abstract archetypal cycle from the lunation cycle to see just how that is the basic cycle that indicates the way all cycles work. Now, the general objective in that part was to get a feel for as many different cycles as we could. And when we did that, then we could add them all together and you could arrive at a feel of the moment. And then you could understand the relationship to history. Obviously, you should look at the stages of cycles with regard to what's happening in the newspapers. Now, we were very unsuccessful because we only know about a limited number of cycles. And the total number of cycles that are active at any given time might be staggering, the amount of them. And different ones might be stronger in different ways at different times. And so it's a hard thing to weigh it all together. Even at that, with the few cycles that we had, it's still quite a bit to hold in consciousness. And it's difficult to judge the relative significance when you have so many different factors. Then we moved on to the second section, having failed in the first. Move on to the second section and fail in it. We tried to understand particular moments in time, and we tried to apply them to everyday usage. The second section was a judging of events, and the special events that are horary questions. The idea being that a question is a silhouette, that the thing that prompts the question is in the air in the answer at the same time. We studied the nature of various different kinds of moments, and we especially studied different kinds of questions we could ask, and which ones were joy questions and which ones were likely to lead nowhere, which are the kind that academic philosophers like to ask. They get plenty of mileage, philosophical mileage out of them, but it's not practical. Then we studied applying things to the questions. We made a big long list of all of the things that make questions unanswerable or making accomplishment difficult. Then we studied how to locate people in a horoscope, in a horary horoscope. Most importantly, the querent, the person asking the question, the agent, the person acting as astrologer, the questited, that is the person about whom the question is asked, and important outsiders. Then we learned how to distribute the horoscope, which is the same as the as the question horoscope, which is called the crisis horoscope, and it is given a different ascendant according to the person that is located. So that if it's a child, the fifth house of the critical horoscope becomes the ascendant of the distributed horoscope. Then we studied how to locate direction and distance and place in horary astrology. And then that was followed by a short study of time and timing in horary astrology. And then we studied all of the things that argue for success in answering a question and bringing about the desired outcome. The last time we met, our most recent meeting, we looked at examples of event and horary horoscopes. Tried to give different samples of different kinds of things so that you could be a little bit used to it. For me, I never had anybody teach me about horary astrology. So when I started doing horary astrology, I was all teaching myself, and it was sort of a lost world. Yes.
Did you start here?
Yes. Yeah. Now we're ready for this short section on electional astrology. And electional astrology is the study of when to start an activity so that things go smoothly and have the greatest likelihood of success. So we want to start things when we're not going to have too many snags and when we're likely to achieve our objective. As I see it, this is probably the astrology of the future. And horary astrology is the astrology of the past, because horary astrology is at least in part about ignorance. You don't know what's going on, and you want to know what's going on and what to do. Horary helps you out of ignorance, but the very fact that you're doing horary shows that there is ignorance there. With electional astrology, a person knows what they want to do. All that is necessary to figure out is a time so that doing it can be harmonious and to ensure the best relationship to the general cosmos. Now, there's another way in which electional astrology is the opposite of horary. When we studied horary, we learned a lot of things from the history of astrology, because people have been doing horaries for a long, long time. In fact, in the beginning, all there was horary astrology. We used terms from the history of astrology, and some of them were several centuries old. And we followed very strict rules. Now, we could try to do that with electional astrology, but we'd only be successful to a certain extent. In fact, some electional astrologers do that very thing, but they only usually do it when they're checking out an election. That is, they put together a time for an election, and then they hand it to somebody else who's studying astrology and say, what is the outcome of this horary question about such and so? So that should work out. I've never tried it, but I know that it is a practice that is done. And these days, astrologers are not so egoistic that they're more willing to interact with each other and ask questions. It's sort of like there are some things that are impossible to do by yourself alone, like cut your hair, for example, unless you want to look awfully choppy. If another astrologer is not available, one takes the horoscope in one's own hands and reads it as a horary horoscope. But there are some differences. For example, in electional astrology, you don't usually have to locate, and you don't have to distribute, and you don't have to do things to find specific people. You can do that, but it's way awkward, and it's not what you want to get at. The way we're going to look at it is not centuries old. We're going to look at it completely new, and everything that's going to be in the electional material, except for the first week, is something that is new, unprecedented. You won't find any of this information anywhere else. I've tried it on astrological societies. I've tried one with the Astrological Society in St. Paul, Minneapolis, and they were all interested in it, but they said, no, it's too much work. We don't want to do all of that work. All right. We're at the early stages, at the incipiency of electional astrology, so we'll be developing tools as we go along the way. This means that we're liable to errors. When you begin things, there are always errors. And if you find errors in logic or going about things, please say something, because then I can pass it on with the rest of the information. I would appreciate it if you would share any ideas you have on the subject of making elections. This is one of those cases where cooperative exchange is exceedingly beneficial. All right. Even if you encounter literature on electional astrology, I would be very happy to see what you come up with. In fact, I just learned a whole bunch of new astrology today, or 2 days ago. I now do something with the progressed horoscope that I've never ever done before, and I would have thought it was hokey, except that it works, and it works very well. All right, in the United States, we say that we have a free country. We say this because we have free elections. We have freedom to choose our government. There is no coercion, no blind action, but everything is done deliberately. Now, freedom is a very difficult thing to describe or to explain. Perhaps this is because we don't understand it and we have not developed it very much in ourselves, and not being free people, it's hard for us to understand freedom. Now, freedom connotes much more than just liberty, though liberty is part of it. Liberty means the ability to move about as you choose. One of the better descriptions of freedom that I have ever encountered is that freedom is a talent. I don't remember where I learned that, but freedom is a talent. And it's a general talent, and it's not a specific talent. It is the talent of living life without being overwhelmed, without being ignorant. It's a talent for living and not being oppressed in any way by life. Now, it's not merely freedom from restraint, or it's not freedom from the law or from any condition, because it's independent of all of those things. One is capable of creating whatever and whenever one chooses to. This indicates that freedom is a very spiritual kind of talent. My goodness. Feel like a second-rate magician or something like that. Freedom is not beyond the law. Whenever we do something in freedom, it can be right within the law. But anytime we do something, we are automatically in the law, because every action is going to have an equal and opposite reaction, and that applies to spiritual things as well as material things. So once you make something manifest, you freely create it, you're subject to the law. But that doesn't mean that the law is coercing you. It may mean that the law is just giving you the perfect feedback, and it's helping you to attain what you want to attain. Now, in freedom, a person can be freely and intentionally suspended in the law. Freedom is, in general, ruled by Aquarius, and the whole notion of being suspended is a very good Aquarian notion. One is right within the law, not trying to get away from the law, not being overburdened by it. Because of knowing, because there is a knowing part of freedom, self-conscious participation in the law and what is accomplished through the law means that there is responsibility. When we enact the cause, we are responsible for the consequence of it. So freedom has, as part of its basic being, a responsibility. When one does express freedom, the greater the expression of freedom, the greater the responsibility. So there are several things that are implied when there is freedom. The first thing is power. In order to do something or to not do something, one must have the power to do or not do. We say that nations are independent or that they are free when they can defend their sovereignty. And I think it's like that with any act of freedom or with any state of freedom. The second factor in freedom is care. We must care enough to do something or to not do something. Freedom is not indifferent. There are people who think that being indifferent to things and not being involved in anything represents a state of freedom. And in that indifference, they lose touch with the ongoing reality, and it actually is a sacrifice of freedom. Knowledge is implied in freedom. You have to know what you're doing, why you're doing, and you have to understand that freedom is almost the opposite of chance. In chance, things just happen. Some people like to rely on chance rather than relying on certain knowledge. Those are the ones that usually lose in poker games. And one has, to a certain extent, has to have a sense of self, a sense of presence, and of knowing what you are, knowing that you are a creative being and that you can do this. Without knowing oneself intimately and being in possession of yourself, I think it's almost impossible to be free. Now, there are other attributes or prerequisites for freedom, but these are the most obvious and they're the most main attributes. Actually, all of them are positive traits of Aquarius and Uranus, which are the sign and its ruler that indicate freedom. Aquarius, the 11th house, and Uranus are all rulers of freedom on the astrological mandala. So in studying the astrological mandala as a complex symbol of the entire universe, from the human point of view anyway, it's a valid thing to do to see the earlier stages of freedom and how we develop those attributes that are associated with Aquarius and that are prerequisites to being free. Let's do that with regard to freedom, and let's do it by looking at mundane houses along with their signs. By our reckoning, the 11th house would represent the ultimate or the highest state of freedom. Let's see if that is true. Now, the 11th house is the succedent house, and the succedent houses are not, to anybody's surprise, houses of responsibility. The second house and Taurus are when one fulfills one's responsibility to personal needs. If a person fulfills their personal needs, we say they have material freedom. And we say a person who has a pocketbook, a stuffed pocketbook, has material freedom. He can go where he wants to go and do what he wants to do, and it's that kind of a thing. The second house is indicated by Taurus, and Taurus is one of the signs of care that contributes to the ultimate that we're looking for in Aquarius. When we look to the fifth house is the house of giving and gifts and generosity. And when one gives and when one wills to give, the most common form of fifth house giving is expression. And we say a person who can express himself or herself is a free person. People who have not learned to express themselves verbally or emotionally or artistic people are people who are subject to their own desires, and they don't have the freedom. So when they get angry, the only way they can express that anger is in just blowing up, which does them no good. The fifth house is also ruled by Leo, and it is the house of self. And so self-possession comes along with self-expression, and self-knowledge is part of being able to be free. The eighth house is associated with dissolution, scorpionic dissolution. It is the opposite of the second house, and it dissolves the bonds of possession or caring for things that can hold us too tightly. And so it's a kind of freedom from that. And the eighth house and scorpionic kind of freedom is a freedom from attachment. We don't cling or hold on to anything, not even children. We want to be free. In such a state, if a person is a completely eighth house person, such a person lives off of the societal funds, whether a person is on Social Security or such like that. The eighth house is shared funds, and a person is taken care of in them. Scorpio happens to be a sign of power, and we said that power was absolutely necessary to be free. And that brings us finally, after we're done with freedom, material freedom and expressional freedom and being free from things, there is then perfect general freedom. One doesn't have to be free from the law or depending on the law. One is free within things. And that is the Aquarian way. It is to be within things and to be suspended within things. One is responsible to everyone, not just children, not just to the people that you owe money to. One is responsible to everyone, to all of humanity, because Aquarius is the complete of humanity. And the kind of Aquarian responsibility is that one would do anything for the sake of friendship. And when we get to that Aquarian degree of freedom, we are friends of everyone. When we think of the 11th house, we think of things that are utopian. And in utopian things, everybody does everything freely. Nobody has to do anything. But you're sort of a prisoner of love, or you're a prisoner of caring for humanity. Aquarius is an ultimate sign of knowledge, and we said that that was one of the other 4 prerequisites. So we can see by looking at the succeedent houses and the fixed signs, we can see how freedom is an evolutionary process. Now, this progressive view of freedom indicates that there is a hierarchy of freedom. And this is suggested by Uranus, whose attitude is always to seek more freedom. It gets freed from one set of restraints, and it's already thinking about the next set that it can be freed from. So it should be obvious that there has to be more freedom than just freedom of choice. By freedom of choice, one can select from what there is, and that's not enough. For the Uranian spirit of freedom, there has to be more than just choosing from what is already there. Simple astrology teaches us that Uranus opens us up immediately. And one of the things Uranus opens us up to is creation. One of the best keywords for Uranus is creativity. And it's usually the index of creativity in any horoscope. If you look at the strength of Uranus or the disposition of Uranus, you can see how creative an individual is. So, creation is a deeper and wider state of freedom than just choosing. Now, when we think of creation, we think of divinity. Creation is one of the primary attributes of divinity. If a being is divine, that being creates. Now, this is a perfect extension of what we've been saying, or what we said earlier about this belonging to the future. In the future, we are going to be more and more creative. We're just now beginning to be creative. We're not even creative about our lives. If we were really creative about our lives, we would see them differently every day. It would all be a whole new ball game every day for us. Can you imagine that? Every moment rediscovering. So, we're just beginning to free ourselves also from the burdens that have put us into ignorance. And we're beginning to volitionally work with society so that the demands of society are not nearly as strong as the demand for freedom that has us working, that comes from within us. Now, all of this shouldn't really be surprising to us. It's pretty obvious. If we ask different observers from different societies to describe the same physical setting, we wouldn't expect widely different descriptions, because it is what it is. We don't have time, and it isn't relevant to compare descriptions of the gods, but there is usually a kind of description that has been found in the mysticism and the mystery schools of all different ilk in history. I'm working in choosing this. I'm choosing something from the Greek mystery school, one of the Orphic mystery schools. In that mystery school, you find it in the Rosicrucian philosophy also. In that mystery school, there were three different kinds of creative beings. First, there were the creators, who were so deep in the spiritual worlds that they could only create the possibilities and the concepts of creation. If you're interested in Rosicrucian philosophy, they constitute the teraphim and the xenophim. The second category of divinities were the emanators. They emanated the creative conception into the inner universe and into the inner nature of all of the becoming beings in that. The third class of creative beings were called fabricators. They compounded and they fashioned and molded and transformed things and the creatures that were in their charge. Now, it wasn't intended, at least I don't think it was intended by the ancient Greeks, but these three classes of divinity fit very nicely into the way we're looking at responsibility, freedom, and creativity. Now, in this designation that we're about to go into, we're not trying to do a mandalic theogony We're not trying to order the gods. We're only trying to develop an idea of freedom and apply it with perspective to astrology. We can indicate or associate the classes of creative divinity with the four mandalic stages of freedom that we've just been looking at. We've already looked at them in two very different ways. Taurus and the second house are like the fabricators. They are like freedom having to do with stuff, with material, which represents an opportunity. Anything, I rather like found art, as they call it now. Anything is the stuff of creation. Leo and the fifth house are like the emanators. They are about creative expression and creative projection, and it just issues from them. And that's the way expression is. It's not communication. Communication is pretty studied. You know how to use words this way and that. Expression, you just pour yourself out. Emanate yourself out, I guess. Scorpio in the eighth house are like the creators. They are the invisible root of creation. And they don't need to participate directly, and usually would prefer to not participate directly. And finally, Aquarius and the 11th house are like all three classes united together in one creative unity. Everything is inseparable, so that everything's all one, and one cannot free oneself from the whole of things. One must be free within the whole of all things. Now, in these talks, we're going to look at three different kinds of elections, and possibly a hybrid fourth, if I can get it all together. The three kinds of elections that we are going to do also relate to the fabricators, the emanators, and the pure creators. The first type of election that we're going to do is called a natural election. Natural elections are based on the nature of stuff and of materials. In order to do a natural election, it requires definite knowledge. The knowledge of stuff and how it corresponds to astrological rulership. Because you can't make something do what it doesn't do. What it is what it is. There is little freedom to deviate from nature. The freedom is in the knowledge of knowing the way nature works, and what it expects or what it wants, and being able to go along with that. Everything in natural elections is based on what is called the doctrine of correspondences. The doctrine of correspondences was given out by Paracelsus, and he did quite a great deal with it, and it's worth reading it. Even though some of it is of several centuries ago, it's still very good. For example, iron, whether it's in a tool or in the blood, is ruled by Mars. And knowing that you have to deal with iron, you know what you have to, what planet you have to direct your attention to. The freedom is in the knowledge of things and choosing to use them when there is a harmonious correspondence between the stellar part and the mundane or earthly part. You're not trying to make water run uphill, but what you're trying to do is get the most out of the water as it's running downhill. That's what a natural election is like. Natal elections are the second kind of elections. They are ad hominem elections. Elections based on the individual or individuals and the performance of the individual or individuals. Natal elections do utilize the natal horoscope as the basic stamp of character. Therefore, in a natal election, one chooses to perform an important function so that the strengths of the character are brought out or accentuated and the weaknesses of character are downplayed. So these kinds of elections, natal elections, are a combination of talent and of readiness and knowing both of them very thoroughly. Now, each of us in our bodies over many, periods of time has adapted the laws of nature, so that the laws of nature within our skin, so to speak, have specialized usages. Like, for example, a lot of the transactions that take place in metabolism are dependent on phosphorus because of the ability of phosphorus to take so many different forms and not have such hard bonds. All right. In natal elections, the idea is to align the microcosmic laws of the individual with the macrocosmic laws of the cosmos. You can see what we're getting at here. We're talking about getting out of a fallen state where we are in ignorance, and that was begun by conceiving not in harmony with the laws of nature that would produce healthy individuals, that would produce individuals that would be well aware of the harmonies and wouldn't need to make so many dumb mistakes as we usually do again and again. So, an example of a natal election is electing a time for endurance depending on the natal horoscope. Like supposing somebody has to climb a mountain. You have to have some natural knowledge there. You don't climb it when it's going to be snowy in winter. But you want to focus on a time when the individual's strength is going to be the greatest and where the person is going to have bravery and stamina in their horoscope. And that, the most common natal election that I have done is for people having choice about when they're going to take their prelims or their orals or something like that, and they want to do it on a day that their performance is going to be best. All right, this is going to be very short. We'll be out of here by 9 o'clock probably. Maybe. And the final kind of election that we're going to do are artificial elections. This is completely new. Nobody does anything like this. They are elections based on self-knowledge and raw creative urge. If one is trying to create something completely new, something wherein the emphasis of the creative conception is on that conception itself and doesn't depend on the knowledge of stuff, or it doesn't depend on personal idiosyncrasy. It's like you're wanting to make something that parallels the cosmos, and it doesn't depend on your performance, and it doesn't depend on stuff. In this, a person knows what they want to do, and they know that the knowledge is within themselves, and it's not something exterior, like a seed and a season or something like that. One has the power to do the work, but still doesn't want to waste that power by working adharmoniously to the times. You don't want to be fighting against the times. A good example of an artificial election is choosing when to start and carry out the writing of a novel. All of the characters could even be shown in that moment, in that everything is started. Uh-oh, when did you start yours? All right. Obviously, when we look at these, we're looking at elections of increasing degrees of freedom and increasing degrees of creativity. Natural elections have the least amount of freedom, and artificial elections have the most. Some activities fall into several categories. We've been showing that all along. For example, if a person has writer's block, it might be wisest to deal with the writing of a novel as a natal election. Similarly, if somebody has allergies to some kinds of plants, electing to plant a garden might be much better done as a natal election than as a natural election. But usually it's pretty obvious and it's pretty clear cut as to which kind of election you're doing, and that is appropriate. All right, now let's look a little bit more at natural elections, and then we'll look at an example. Natural elections are, for me, the most difficult. This is because you have to know, and you have to know really well. You have to know rulerships and sub-rulerships and all sorts of things like that. Very difficult. You have to be accurate because you can't fool nature. A seed is only going to respond to the correct soil and the correct moisture and such like that. For some aspects of natural elections, a person almost has to be a specialist. You have to specialize in an area in astrology and in an area in the world. Now, most things in natural elections are determined by nature itself. Even the time ranges. There's only a certain time range in which you can plant seeds. There are still people around yet that try to plant seeds completely by sidereal astrology, which means that for most of the precessional cycle, they're going to be planting seeds in the wrong season. And they're very pig-headed about it, but of course they're not planting gardens. All right. The example that we're going to use is one that comes up, and it comes up, I'm working with 3 such things right now. This is the handout for tonight. The kind of natural election that we're going to do is selecting a time for a surgical operation. I don't know if there is a special time for an inversion or not.
There can be one for scheduling a cesarean section.
Oh, yes, yeah.
A natal chart
Yeah.
for somebody.
Well, we won't think cesarean yet. Yeah. This is taken from page 609 of the Encyclopedia of Medical Astrology by Howard Leslie Cornell. There is no copyright on it, so we are perfectly justified in passing out these copies. The book is a compilation of research into astrological writings, some of which date back quite a few centuries. For example, the Egyptians used to even do brain surgery and surgery on the eye. I assume that means cataracts, but I'm not absolutely positive. And the rules that are in this list that we're going to follow very carefully have been corroborated many times over centuries and have been found to be accurate. Sometimes they're rediscovered by doctors even in our own times. They find out some of these simple basic things transpire. Now, a lot of the other material in this book, it's a big, thick book. A lot of that information is not relevant anymore. It's too old-fashioned, and we need a new book of that kind. We need somebody like a Virgo who would put together all these. I believe it was a Virgo that put it together in the first place. Interesting thing, he put it together, and he spent all of his free time putting together this book for years after year after year. and his family all thought he was crazy. And he ended up in a mental institution. By the time he was done, he knew a lot of astrology from a lot of centuries, but he ended up in a mental institution. It's a fascinating book to look into. All right. Applying this information is frustrating. In fact, you're going to find all elections are frustrating because the world is not accommodating and amenable to applied astrology. We've got these tight schedules. Like some surgeons will only do surgeries on Tuesdays and Thursdays between 10 and noon. It's because, that's the only time they can get the operating room. And so what it turns out very often is that the natural election of choosing a day for surgery is choosing the lesser of several evils, it turns out to be. Before looking at this set of rules for setting a date, a different natal election should be made. One should select a surgeon that is harmonious to the patient. The patient and the surgeon should share harmonious rising signs. And the Saturn of the surgeon should not be in the first or sixth house of the patient. So you should have a good harmony. This is something that's been proven out also in psychology. They find out that if the practitioner likes the patient, a therapy is much more likely to be successful. In fact, that's the only factor they could find over many, many different cases. All right, now let's look at this line by line. First of all, draw a line after line 6 because the first 6 are of the highest echelon, because you're not ever going to get exactly a time where everything is going to work. Number 1, it says operate on the increase of the moon if possible. Now, the way these things are stated in this list, some of them are taken right out of texts from ancient people. The Howard Leslie Cornell was very good about quoting people and quoting them accurately, rather than translating and saying, well, I think he means this. There are several reasons why you operate on a waxing moon. One is that things done on a waxing moon are more likely to success. Number 2 is that there is a greater likelihood for recuperability. Now, if success is more important, then you choose later in the waxing moon. Like when the moon is trine to the sun on its way to the full. If recuperability is more important, you do it as soon after the new moon as is possible, because then the energy pickup will be coming through the whole waxing period. All right, any questions on that? Number 2, do not operate at the exact time of the full moon, as the fluids are running high at this time. Pretty much self-explanatory. Fluids are always a problem in surgery. I have the sun, the moon, and the ascendant, and the ruler of the ascendant in negative signs, but the sun, moon, and ruler of the ascendant are all in watery signs. And it turns out I'm very juicy. Like when I had half a lung removed, they had me several days longer than is normal on the drainage tubes, which if you've ever experienced that, it's like you're skewered. They put 2 tubes into the side, and then the fluids drain out into something like a pot, like a spittoon or something like that. And you can't move, because if you move in at least a little bit, those tubes stick in pretty far. And, all right. So it's obviously that since fluids are a big problem, you don't want to do things. There's also more confusion in a full moon, and there's more distraction, so success is not very high at a full moon. Number 3, never operate when the moon is in the same sign as at birth. This rule is again about fluids. Each person has their own astrological biorhythm. They have their own lunar cycle when fluids go up and down. Being an older person, I have cycles of retention and letting go of retained fluids, and that's individual to each person. If you have to sacrifice one of the first 6 rules, this is probably the one that should be sacrificed. Again, going, ephemeral, electional astrology is compromises. You have to make compromises because you won't always get everything your way. Number 4 is also about fluids. And number 4 is probably, these are supposed to be prioritized, but I would certainly rate number 4 above number 3 if it were my book, but then it's not my book. It's again a matter of fluids, and the reason why you will wait for a day or two to get beyond the organ that is being operated on, the sign that rules the organ that's being operated on, or that part of the body, is because it takes a while for fluids to subside. So suppose you're having a lung operation that, such as as I had. You wouldn't want to do it when the moon is in Aries or Taurus, because when it gets to Gemini, complications are going to come up. You certainly wouldn't want to do it in Gemini, but you'd probably want to wait until it got to Leo to do it, because any fluids that would have collected during the time when the moon was in Gemini would have been given a chance to subside. All right. Number 5 is do not operate when the moon is applying closely to a square or opposition of the sun, Saturn, or Mars. This is, in a way, this is a repeat of the last part of 4. The rules were taken out of different writings from people in history, and it just pulled them out all the way. Number 6, let the moon be increasing in light and in sextile or trine to Jupiter or Venus and not afflicted by Mars. Now, this is not just a repetition of an astrological belief system. This is actually something that works in nature. For example, drought conditions, like in the 80s, we had a terrible, terrible drought here, and it wasn't cleared up until there was a trine between Jupiter and Venus. So like healing in a wide sense comes about through Jupiter and Venus. In the ethers themselves, there are statistical studies that show that radio reception is much better when there are trines and sextiles to Jupiter and Venus in the heavens. Usually they use heliocentric as much as geocentric in that. So those are the first 6 that are the most important, and they start trailing off to other things, which I think some of them are just out of the diaries of physicians that have done that have written in their diaries, this is what happened. Number 7, let the moon be in a fixed sign, but not in the sign ruling the part of the body it's being operated on, and such sign also not on the moon also not on the ascendant. What we're talking about here is, suppose there's been an accident or somebody's been wounded or something like that. What you hear on the radio is you get the effects. They say the patient has been stabilized, and this is perfect usage of words to describe what this is trying to say astrologically. The fixed signs are indicators of stability, and if stabilizing the patient is an important thing to do, you want to take this into account. This is where specializations come in, like different operations require different degrees of stability. Everything in the body is a result of homeostatic balance, and that's key to health, and that's the most important kind of stability. The balance between the potassium and the sodium and the sugar and the insulin and all of that. All the balances have to be there. All right, number 8. Do not operate when the moon is applying to any aspect of Mars, as such tends to danger of inflammation and complications after the operation. I would almost be tempted to put this up with the first 6, because what's happening now is that Mars not only rules inflammations, it rules infections. And in the hospital, there are very virulent strains of bacteria, and that a lot of people die because of infections, because of just what's in the air. And so this is very important. And you especially want to look if the person has a likelihood to infections in the natal chart. Like I have Mars in the first house, and Mars is very well fortified by Venus and by Pluto both, so that I'm not too likely to infections in the course of an operation, so it wouldn't be quite so important for somebody like me. All right, any questions on what we've done so far? You're going to get called on. You'll be sure of it. People know you study astrology, and they say, I'm going to have to have an operation. Tell me when. All right, number 9. Avoid operation when the sun is in the sign ruling the part of the body in which the operation is to be performed. The reason for this is not fluid. It is also a matter of inflammation. Sun and Mars are both planets of inflammation, and often it is said that the sun burns out the sign or house that it is located in, and that is in elections as well as in natal conditions. All right, number 10, never operate when the moon is combust or within 17 degrees of the sun and with the moon opposite Mars at the same time. That's a pretty long laundry list. You're looking at a lot of things there. You're not always going to find all of those things present. You have to exercise judgment and things like that if you're going to apply this rule. If you're too general, you're never going to find a good time for surgery. Nothing's ever going to work out. If one substitutes the word impedition for impediment and looks back at the definition of impedition that we had when we gave out that list of negative conditions, that tells you a pretty good way about the moon. I have nothing to say about the 17 degrees of the sun and the moon, except that it means that it says don't do anything 2.5 days before the new moon, which is pretty good sense. Number 12. Venus and Jupiter and the ruler of the ascendant should be in the ascendant or in the midheaven if possible and free from any Mars affliction. It's a redundancy, again, of something that indicates a positive atmosphere. We're talking here about a lot of leeway in choosing. I haven't had a opportunity to choose a surgery in about 24 years in which I had all the leeway that I wanted. Again, the caution about Mars is for the caution about accidents and carelessness, because doctors do make mistakes. It's not just only about inflammation and infection. The nature of Mars indicates the nature of the doctor or the surgeon that's doing the work. Number 13. Fortify the sign ruling the part of the body to be operated on. This means you have to find a time when a benefic planet and or a benefic aspect relate to the ruler of the sign ruling the organ that's going to be operated on. That's what a fortification means. It means, this is not just, this is a combination list. It's not just the negative things that you should avoid. It's the positive things that you should look for if possible, so that if you see two different times that an operation has about the same degree of negativity, if you then look for fortifying positives, that's the way to choose between the two times. Number 14, a Mars hour is evil for surgical operations. Again, this refers to the misuse of the knife, which is ruled by Mars, and in our day and age, it could also mean infection. You have to have a table of planetary hours, which is not a difficult thing to get. And then the last rule, do not cut a nerve when Mercury is afflicted. And then it tells you other places to look in the book. This is too vague for me to understand, and I'm too little of a specialist to be able to answer this. I don't understand why one would want to cut a nerve in the first place. Sometimes it's incidental to doing other work in the surgery, but it is something that has to be done. But if, otherwise I don't see any reason for cutting a nerve. Though there are some people that have allergic reactions that are so serious that they're allergic to just about everything, that sometimes cutting a nerve relieves them greatly. All right, that's about as much as we have for tonight, unless you have questions.
I was wondering, so does electional astrology override the importance of the transits or progressions on an individual's chart?
You'd use the transits and progressions if your performance were important. That's in fact that's what we're going to go into next time. That's a performance election or a natal election. But if you're doing something here, you would not look so much in the person's natal chart for choosing a surgery. You would look at these rules and stay with these rules, because the body is the body, and it is subject to the doctrinal correspondences.
I didn't get what you said on 13 about fortifying the sign.
Fortifying, all right. Suppose you're doing an operation on a knee. Then Capricorn would rule that sign, and then you try to do it when there were good aspects from Jupiter and Venus to Saturn. That is what fortification is. Or anytime any good aspect of any kind to Saturn could be doing it. It is just like fortification in bread or in cereal, fortified by Venus and Jupiter, guaranteed to keep you healthy. Well, thank you very much. You can see these are just going to be, what?
On number 11, what was the principle you were talking about the last days of the waning moon?
We were talking about the one here, we're talking about number 10. Yeah, that's 17 degrees away from the moon. Usually the last day or two of the moon is called a boon moon. And a boon moon means that everything's sort of flat and everything's sort of collapsing, and it's probably the time when the recovery is the worst. That being able to come back with full energy is least likely.
Yeah, I see that over and over again. People are in bad shape
Yeah.
a couple of days before the new moon.
Yeah. Okay, maybe you got some things you could add to us for us here. Okay. See, experience, much more important than just